Of course, this ain't nothing. Everybody said, oh, geez, you don't know what real problems are. I admit this is a major inconvenience, but you don't know what real problems are. Did you do your time in Nam? Huh? Do you know what it's like to spend Valentine's Day in Nam? The name on my uniform said Greaseman Ellie, but everybody knew me as Sergeant Fury. Flying Tree, 1967. I think the only things that kept me going were those letters from Betty Jo Bielosky. I loved that woman. And while the other guys weren't getting letters, I was getting them from Betty Jo. At night, we'd be gathered around our campfire, and I'd read Betty Jo's letters aloud. Shapiro, Wisniewski, Carter, Fibish, Kalachecki, Robinson, they'd all be leaned against their packs. They'd watch me as they chain-smoked camels and listen to Betty Jo write her never-ending letters of love. Dear Nino, Valentine's Day is coming up next week. I can't believe it's been almost a year since you've been gone. It'll be a very lonely Valentine's Day for me because, well, since you're a Nam, I'll be all alone in my place, just looking out the window. So at the stroke of midnight on Valentine's Day, think of me as I will be thinking of you with my heart so far. And just then the letter was interrupted by a familiar sound. Incoming! We all hit the deck as the air was filled with fire and mud. I said, Shapiro, Wisniewski, established perimeters. Watch it. You got him. You got him on your left. Move it. Hump that Claymore, Robinson. Well, I took a hit in the leg. The medevac chopper came in just in time. It seemed like we just got on the radio, and there they were. I signaled that I was the wounded one, but I didn't want him to land because it was a hot LZ. So I said, just come on overhead. Come on overhead. And I grabbed the lower strut. And while hanging on with one hand, I fired at the enemy position with the other. Happy Valentine's Day, you maggots! Send this to Ho Chi Minh with my blessing! Well, I pretty much weakened their attack by my low-level pass. They dropped me off at Quang Tree Hospital. So my CO came and he said, Manelli, you've been doing a pretty good job. Tell you what, why don't you take a week's sick leave? Go back stateside. Relax, talk to the people. Well, I didn't call anybody because I figured, what a surprise. I'll stop back and see Mom and Pop in the butcher store. And I'll get to see Betty Jo Bielosky. Well, I stopped by Betty Jo's place uninvited. I just opened the door, and there she stood there. She said, Nino, what are you doing home? I said, Betty Jo, ain't you glad to see me? And then I heard a man's voice say, Betty Jo, who's that at the door? And around the corner came Larry Pendleton, the conscientious objector. I said, Betty Jo, you cheap horsey. I wouldn't mind you dating anybody, two-timing me with anybody. Maybe a guy from Airborne, maybe a guy from Recon, maybe a CB. But to go out with a conscientious objector like Larry Pendleton! And I grabbed them both, and I threw them into the backyard. And I took off my belt, and I tied one end around Betty Jo's neck, and I threw it over the clothesline and tied the other end around Larry Pendleton's neck. I tied it tight enough so they both had to stand on their tippy toes. If one of them put his feet down, he'd choke the other one. Well, they could do it for about 15 minutes. I just sat there watching him till finally Larry started getting tired. And every time he put his heels down, he'd start choking Betty Jo. She'd go, oh, Larry, get up! And so he'd get up, and then he'd get tired, he'd choke her again. And then she'd get tired, she'd start choking him. And the two of them started choking each other! 45 minutes later, after an agonizing, scream-filled session, they choked each other to death. I just stared at them for a while, ground out my camel, and let myself out the front door. And as I was walking down the driveway, disgusted at that cheap floozy's behavior, her daddy came walking up the walkway and said, hey, Nino, welcome back. I said, thank you there, Mr. Bielosky. He said, you seen Betty Jo and Larry? I said, yeah. I think they're hanging around the backyard.